We're at the bottom of Peizayin Amud Beis. I'm just going to go back a little bit before we're really on the last line by Amr of Yanai, but just because the previous Gemara is going to be relevant, I'm going to say it. V'yachalta, 5 lines to the bottom. Chalta v'lei moitz tzavan v'lei anov v'dot v'acher. We say that this heter that a person can eat as when he's harvesting, so when it's hard to harvest, and eat from what he's working on. It says he can eat, but he can't squeeze out the juice, because then he'll end up drinking more than he would eat if he would just eat it. Anovim v'lo anovim v'davar acher. Say he can eat grapes, but he can't eat grapes together with something else, because that will increase his appetite. Rashi says dipping it in salt, but that's going to be a Gemara later on, which we'll talk about specifically about salt. But in general, he's not allowed to enhance the taste of what he's eating, because then he'll end up eating more. Knafshach, and this is the part that we want to see. Knafshach, knefesh shel bal habayis, kach nafshach shel poel. We're making a comparison between the pasuk says, "Ki savai b'keren reyacha v'yechalto anovim." You'll come into your friend's vineyard as a worker, and you can eat grapes. Knafshecha, as you wish, as you desire, till you're full. You can't put it in your kalim. So we darshan is kanafshecha. We darshan it to mean knefesh shel balabais, just like the nefesh of the balabais. Kach nafshesh shel poel, that they're treated the same. Ma nafshech oichelu pater, av nafshech shel poel oichelu pater. One might think that the balabai, that the poel, when he eats it, he becomes like a purchaser. Somewhere were to buy grapes from a balabais as they're being picked, he would immediately, that would be considered the gemar malacha of them. Once they're sold, there's no longer you don't gather them into piles and smooth them out, which is the gemar malacha. That would be the end. The selling it would be the end of the road, and therefore you would be chayiv in separating trumas and maasros. So the pasuk is going to tell you, knafshecha, just like the owner is allowed to eat. There's no din; he's allowed to take a snack from the anavim. So too, the pile who's entitled to eat is treated the same as the owner, that he's allowed to eat it without separating maasros. Unlike someone who purchased it, he's not treated like someone who purchased it. Okay, now we're going to skip to Amr of Yanai. Amr of Yanai, bottom line of Peizayin Amud Beis. Amr of Yanai, ein ha-tevel mischayiv v'maiser. Tevel is not mechayiv v'maiser ad sheyira pnei habayis, until it reaches the house itself, until it's brought into the house. Although we've been talking about gemar malacha, which is very specifically the Torah. The Gemara often is talking about miruach. When you gather, you harvest the fruit and you bring it into a pile and you smooth out the pile. So smoothing out the pile is the final step. But midaraisa, Rabbi Yanai says that is not enough to be mechayiv you in meiser. It has to be until you bring it into the house. At that point, that's when it becomes mechayiv in meiser. Shenema b'yati hakadosh min habayis. The Torah says the gabi the chiyuv of meiser. Yeah. Well, it's that the what should we call it? The bi'arta v'kodesh habayis. The pasuk says, "Was the pasuk? V'matav nesham lekecha bi'arta v'kodesh habayis v'gam nesatev l'alevi l'ger liyosam almana kol mitzvaysecha shivisani levatim mitzvaysecha v'leishecha." He has to have given all of his meisers when it comes to the regel where he's mechuyev to give meiser. He has to be able to make a declaration that he already took all the maasros. It says min habayis. That he dashes. That means he has to come into the bayis to be mechuyev in meiser. Yochanan disagrees. He says it doesn't have to go that far. It doesn't have to go to the house. It has to go into the chotzer. Since there's a reference to going into your gates, the gates are around the chotzer. Now, we're going to see a machlokes between Rabbi Yana and Rabbi Yochanan about whether the final stage is the house or the chutzner, and we're going to continue talking about it for a little bit more. But their shita, we're going to talk about their just shita in general. The shita that it's not just the gemar malacha, the miruach, but midaraisa you need a further stage of bringing it either into the house or into the chutzner. But they're going to be interchangeable after we iron out exactly what their reasons are. As far as the Gemara continuing on and asking on Rav Yana, it will also apply to Rav Yochanan as well. Practically, whatever Rav Yochanan in Habayis, Rav Yochanan also it says in Habayis. What does he do with that pasuk? It's to tell you the nature of what kind of chutzner we're talking about. It says so that tells you that the chiyuv ma'aser comes from when it's brought into the chatzar, but because the Torah says bias, that tells you that it has to be a type of chatzar that's similar to a bias, that it's watched over, that it's secure. What does Rabbi Yana do with the pasuk of Bisharecha? That's not coming to tell you that once you bring it into the chatzar, it's already mechayiv and ma'aser. It's coming to tell you that it has to be brought in through the main entrance. The light. If you wanted to bring it through a back entrance or through the roof, that would not be enough to be mechayiv. So it's not just that it's brought into the house. It's not that it gets in the house, but it has to be brought in through the main entrance. The act is what makes it mechayiv the meiser, not the presence in the house. Maser Rav Chanina, Huzah, Kinafshechem. He asks from the brisa that we had gone back for to look at, that we had said that the chiyuv of achila, that you have to allow your pile to eat from the produce as he's harvesting it, that we learned in the brisa. It says kanafshach, and that pasuk it says like your what it means is the way you want to eat, but we darshan to be kanafshach, just like the nefesh of the owner. The pile, the worker, is the same. Man nafshach eichel potter, just like the person who's the person himself, the owner, can eat it and be potter. Av nafshach pile eichel potter. Similarly, the pile can eat it. He's in the same boat, that he's not treated if he's a lekeach. The lekeach has an accelerated timetable for becoming mechuyev in meiser. We say no. The pile is like the owner, that he doesn't get a jump to the head of the line and become mechuyev in meiser. The mashmais from this is halakeh chayev, but the lekech is chayev. My law besada, is it not talking about a lekech? Even though it hasn't, according to Rabbi Yanai and Rabbi Yochanan, you have to bring it either into the house or the chutzner. How could the Torah say a lekeach? A lekeach is not as good as miruach, as finishing. So it's like a way of accelerating the finishing of the product, because obviously you're not doing anything with it anymore once it reached the lekeach, but it didn't reach the house or the chutzner. So how could you say you're going to be mechuyev in ma'aser? Amar Papa hacha v'te'ena ha'medes begina v'noifach v'noifach l'chatzar askin. He says we're talking about a fig tree that's it's stretching out the branch into the house or into the chatzar, depending on whether you're talking about like Rabbi Yana or Rabbi Yochanan. According to Rabbi Yana, it would be into the house. Because Rabbi Yochanan will be into the courtyard. So as soon as the worker takes it off the branch, it's looked at as if it's in the house. And if you'd be treated as a lekech, it will be a lekech that was brought into the house, and that's the reason why it would be chayav. So the Gemara, is not chayav. So then the Gemara says, if that's the case, what are you saying? He's potter just like the balabais is potter. It's not treated as lekech. But the balabais, if he took it off the tree straight into his house, at that point it would be mechuyev and meiser. He wouldn't be able to just snack on it without taking meiser. So Gemara, no, it's different, because we're talking about over here, like we said, the fig tree is outside. and the branch goes inside. Balabayas eno b'teinosai. But the balabayas, until the tree itself is harvested, he doesn't look at it as if it's inside, because he's this harvesting is on something that's on the outside of the house. Lekech ain't of the mekle, but lekech, he only cares about what he bought. So for his purposes, the tree is irrelevant. Very, you have to, I'm learning now. Okay, so you can't come into this room. Okay, Leah, close the door. Dr. Mara, I have my grandchildren are all like at this glass door looking in. Shlomo, don't worry about it. It's okay. I told them to close the door. Thank you. Is it true? The mashmayis from this brisa is we're saying we're learning out from pasuk ganafsha. We're saying to say that a pile is not doesn't have the same status as a lekech. I should mention from the previous Gemara that there's a Taisus that asks a very good question that we had just mentioned before, that it's the act of bringing in through the, right, we said you have to bring it through the gate and not from the back of the house or the roof. So if the branch is stretching into the house, why would that be mechuyev and ma'aser? That it never was brought into the house. You know, if we're talking about the act, not the presence, that's
Right.
Taisus' question. Back to Gemara, but in any case, the Gemara says, how could you say lekech? The mashmais of this, we need nafshach to tell you that pile is not like a lekech. So that's mashma the lekech medaraisa is mechai. But is that true? Why were the stores of Beis Hino? We had Beis Hino a few blot ago. It was a very popular marketplace when we said we wanted to figure out what the sha'ar, what the value, what the market price was. You went to Beis Hino. So, why were the stores of Beis Hino destroyed? 3 years before the rest of Yerushalayim, because they said this is mutter midaraisa, it's only also midaraban. Shahayu oimrim, in what way did they say that? Asa ta'asa ve'chalta, v'loy moicha. They dash in the pasuk says, Asa ta'asa is kol tuas arecha yotza asad shana v'shana v'chalta v'neshem alikach v'mak mashi yiftal t'shakat shmoishan. Mas l'goyin kat yoresh v'tzarech v'koytz v'tzarech v'mantilmat yishem alikach kol hayam. But this is the pasuk that tells you that you have to separate meiser, and we say we dash him to mean the loy meicher, the person who, if you're making a meruach and you have in mind to sell it, then you don't have to separate. You don't have to take the meiser and bring it. You don't have a chiyuv to bring it to Yerushalayim to eat it. You could sell it and let the person who bought it be ma'aser it. I mean, I'm a little confused about this because we know that Amaratzim don't separate Maestros, and Balabatim and the Surbim Rabbanon, so it's not Amaratz does. This seems to be saying there's no chiyuv for anyone to separate it if they were if they finished it, they did the Gemar Malacha al Shem to sell it, then there's no chiyuv on them to be maser. So why is it only Amaratzim that we say that they didn't separate Maestros?
According to this Gemara, it seems like that would only be on the Madarabana that we're talking about.
So he's saying it's only Madarabana that they have to that they separate it, but they don't really have to. Okay, so it's right. There's no chiyuv. This is not really what we're bringing our raya from. It's just
no.
I'm surprised to see that Midarabanan they were misaken that Surbim Rabbanan should separate. It sounds like it's a takanas chachamim that of the Mai that Amaretz Uchesh didn't separate mice. So it's like a derabanan. Uchesh, in spite of the fact that Rabbanan were misaken that they should separate, they didn't. That we hush, they don't do so. Even though, like we say, that we assume that most people do separate. So it's like a
Right.
chiddush that the usage says a lot of derabbanans and derabbannans over here. So, and
Again, also we're forgetting, we always forget that we're talking about a real agricultural economy.
so it was.
Meaning,
So it's,
most people had a garden in their backyard would
they would
grow
eat
it.
it themselves.
Yeah, it wasn't like a whole.
Okay, I understand, but we're talking about people who actually bought it, right? We're talking about
Right.
when you
Yeah,
buy.
yeah.
So I'm saying you're saying that maybe it could be that they made it to eat themselves. That's your. I think that's what
No, I'm
you're
just saying
saying. They had to make a lot of takonas because there was so much selling going on. Yeah, listen,
or
no, of course, most people ate. I think back before industrialization, before something like 90% of people had to do the agriculture in order to produce enough to feed everyone. There was
yeah.
so little margin in it. But in any case, Araya is from Tua Zaracha V'Lo Lekech, that the only one who has to separate Meiser is the person who grew it, but not a Lekech. This pasuk is exactly the opposite of what we were saying. We were saying a Lekech has an accelerated din, he has to separate Trumas and Meisers, and this part now is saying a pasuk that tells Lekech is Potter, at least Midaraisa. Um, these Gemaras, this is a great Gemara to learn because this comes up very often, the nitty-gritty details of Truma Saracha. So like we're coming to a little bit of a picture of it, of that almost everything is a derabana. I mean, with the rights of the person who buys it is not mechuyev. Someone who's preparing it for sale has no chiyuv to separate meiser. All this is all derabana, and as of now, we're saying Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yanai say that it has to be brought into the house midaraisa in order to be mechuyev, and therefore this din, according to them, this din that when you finish smoothing out, or you gumar malacha, when you finish smoothing out the grain, that is mechuyev ma'isa. It's also midarabah. It's only when you come to the later point that it's deraisa mechuyev in ma'isa. So the Gemara says, Elamai, you have to say Midirabanon, Einachanami. This din of a lekeach being mechuyev in separating meiser, and that it's mechuyev and meiser right away when he buys it. He doesn't wait till Gemar Malacha. Is only Midirabanon. Cross machta b'yalma. That means this pasuk that we brought kenafsha to tell you that the pile is not like a lekeach. Now, if lekeach is only Midirabanon, obviously saying a pile is not like a lekeach can't be. The pasuk can't be telling you that. So it must be that that's only an asmachta b'yalma to tell on that which we say that even though midirabanan a pile is going to be, I'm sorry, like kech is going to be mechuyev and meisus, a pile is not like him. And then we bring the pasuk kanafshach to tell you that a pile is not like a lekech. It's also only a smachta for this dirabanan dikadin. So where it says, okay, now we're at this, we reach this point, el kanafshach lamayasa. So what is this pasuk kanafshach coming to tell you if we're saying that it's only an asmachta b'yalma? So that's not the reason for the pasuk. Look at the time. Knafshach ma nafshach em chasamta potter apoil em chasata potter. Just like you yourself, if you decided I'm going to put a, as I'm working on my own tour, I'm going to be chaysim myself. I'm going to put a muzzle, put a literal muzzle on my face. I could do so. You might be considered a strange person or a Fauci follower, they would call him. But you'd be potter from Lesachim Shar, you know how to shar. It's coming to tell you, even though this din that a pile can eat from what he's working on when he's at the Gemar Malacha, on the surface appears similar to the halacha of Lesachim, there is no equivalent lav of Lesachim pile as he's working, which would be strange. I mean, just literally, there's no such thing as muzzling a person. So why would you think there would be a lav on something that doesn't happen? Masir Marzucha, Ezu Garnin Lemaisers. What is the Gairin, meaning the Saif Malacha, that what we call miruach legabi tvua, b'kishun and b'diluan, by gourds and by cucumbers. So we say, when is the Gemar Malacha? Misha Yifkesu, when they reach the stage where they don't have the same gathering. These are, so this is the way you determine that they've reached the end of their growth and they're ready to be eaten. When they lose the blossom at the end of a cucumber, there's like a blossom that by the time it comes to us, it's gone. But when that falls off, that means it's Gemar Malacha. For Amar Abasi, Mishiyanato Pika Shalhem. Abasi says, when it's taken off, that he explains that that's what it means. My la mishiyitkesu afilu besada. Doesn't that mean even there's no mention of it going into the house? We're saying even if it reaches this point before we get to the house of the chatzim. So no, it's not a stira on Rabbi Yana and Rabbi Yechon who said it has to be brought to the house, even though we say when it reaches this point of mishiyitkesu, that's talking about only after it gets into the house and it has a Gemar Malacha, then it's going to be Chayiv and Maisus.
So according to this, it's not even if you bring it into the house, it's still not Chayiv until this falls off.
Right. Until you have a Gemar Malacha. But I guess you were looking at it that it's an alternative. If it reaches the house as an alternative to Gemar Malacha. I think it means both. It's you need both of them. So normally they wouldn't bring it into the house until they already smoothed it out. Or if you took something and by taking it you indicated that you no longer were going to be mereyachet, right? If you took some seeds that you wanted to eat, you wanted to make so now there's no longer any Gemar Malacha to be done with it, so that's the end of it. So Dr. Mara, sort of this is really the question you were asking. It shouldn't say that it becomes roy, it becomes chuyev and meiser from the time that it blossomed. It should be until, even after it came into the house, you still have to wait until the blossom falls off. So Gemara, no, you can't say that. I might think it's like when it's a question. It's not. I might think it's not talking about an individual fruit, an individual gourd, but rather talking about the crop altogether until all the blossoms of that crop had fallen off. So that if you would say Acha Yifkasu, you would misunderstand it. So therefore we say Misha Yifkasu, when this individual one that was brought into the house, when that happens, that's when it becomes Mechoyiv and Maisus. Kamash Mala Misha Yifkasu Mechias Chulip Kusai. But when it begins, meaning from this particular one. Masa Mazutrum, Rav Nachman, we ask another Kash on Rabbi Yechanan and Rav Yanai. Garner Lamaisa L'chayev La Mishum Tevel. When is the Garner? When is the Gemar Malacha for Maisa that it becomes Mechayiv Alts Tevel? That you have to separate the Maisus Misha Tigma Malacha from Gemar Malacha. Where's Gemar Malacha? Done. Malachas Hachnasasim. When it's the Gemara at this point assumes Hachnasasim, means that you gather it together. Doesn't mean if you gather it even in the sada, and it's not necessary to bring it into the house of the chatzar. It means when you bring it into the house. It means not to bring it into a pub, but bring it into the house. Another possibility, and this is now we're switching the whole din of Rav Yanai. Until now, we're saying that Rav Yanai is saying a general rule that all tvua, any kind of produce, has to be brought into the house in order to. It's also Rav Yechanan, Rav Yanai has to be brought into the house of the chatzar in order to be mechoyev in ma'aser. Now we're saying Rav Yanai said it only in a very specific case. When someone takes olives or grapes and rather than processing them to make them into wine or oil, he's intending to eat them. Rashi says, there he says this this big discussion in the Rishonim. Why, if you're not intending to process it, but rather the Torah mentions yayin and shemen. The Torah doesn't mention grapes and olives that are being eaten. So Rashi says that it's still mechoyev and ma'aser. So Rabbi Yanai only said about these particular kinds of zaysim and anavim that you can eat. The la b'nei goyrin, since you're planning to eat them, you're not planning to make them, to gather them together and press them. Avachitin usayrin, bachitin and sayrin, bread, wheat and barley, goyrin behedjik sibbe. On those that taka, we said that goyrin is enough, and there's no need to bring it into the house. So it's an alternative. If it's something that's going to be processed. So then the Gemar Malacha is enough. You don't need to bring into the house. That which Rabbi Yana and Rabbi Yechon said, I need to bring into the house, he's talking about specifically things that you're planning to eat. So then there's no gathering. Alternatively, the alternative there is that you bring it into the house. Ashchan Adam. Now the Gemara is turning to the general rule. We're going back to the general halacha that a person, a pile who's eating, who's working, is allowed to eat. And we said that's from the Gemara halacha when you come to the harvest. And we have a halacha also, that a shar is allowed to eat as it's threshing. So ashkan adam b'chomer. So in adam we say, like we said before, it has to be when it's Gemara halacha, when he's harvesting, the shar b'talish. And we find a shar that he's allowed to eat when he's threshing, which means obviously it was already harvested and it's now on a further along in the process. Adam b'talish minalan. How do we know that an Adam can even eat after he's harvested and he's still working on it? We learn as a kavacham mishar. Ma'ashar she'eni oichel b'mechuber. Oichel b'talish. Certainly a shar, which cannot eat b'mechuber, can eat b'talish. Adam she'oichel b'mechuber, any din she'oichel b'talish. Now Rashi answers a question because we're, as you can probably tell from the form of the Gemara, we're going to say, how do we know a shar b'mechuber, and how are we going to know an Adam b'talish? And we're going to prove both of them. So now we're saying mashar she'eni oichel b'mechuber. We're going to prove. We're about to prove that a shar is oichel b'mechuber. So Rashi says it means that it's not said with the pasuk behedjik. And Rashi is going to say that also in the reverse. We're going to make the kal v'chaymer the other way. So mashar she'eni oichel b'mechuber. But certainly a shar, which there's no pasuk directly that says that it can eat b'mechuber. It only says it legabe saksa b'disha when it's threshing. Oichel b'talish can eat b'talish. Adam she'oichel b'mechuber. An Adam who can eat even earlier when it's still mechuber. Ain't it din she'oichel b'talish? So the Gemara, no. Malasha shechinata b'tzuvah chasim masli. There's a din of leisachsam. There's a din of muzzling. Adam she'yata b'tzuvah chasim masli. There's no din of chasima. There's no lav of chasima. So the Gemara Adam b'tzuvah chasim masli b'kam v'chaymer. The Gemara says make it faket. Maybe you tackle Adam should be mechayiv. There should be a lav of being chaysim your worker. Mishar u'mashar she'yata b'tzuvah lacha yosei. There's no din of chaya chicha on a shar, but a person, you have a responsibility to help every Jew, to help them live. So if there's a din leisachsim by a shar, certainly you shouldn't be allowed to be chaysim in a person. Finally, we're getting back to what we had said. Kanafsha yapoil. Ma nafsha im chasamte potter. Apoil im chasamte potter. We learn out from that pasuk. We have that extra pasuk. Kanafsha. It's coming to tell you that there's no din chasima. Just like you can be chaysim the person himself, you could also be chaysim he could also be chaysim. Just like there's no, he could be chaysim himself. So too, if he used chaysim his worker, he wouldn't be chayiv for loisachsim. I mean, he'd obviously be chayiv on being mevatel the essay of allowing his worker to eat, but he wouldn't be over on the lav of loisachsim. Okay, so we dealt with a shar b'mechuber. What about the other way around? All of mitadish minal and amakra kama, base palm. Since we say kama twice, so one is coming to tell you an adam b'chuba. The second one is coming to tell you an adam b'talish. If Ami Amar adam b'talish leitzarcha, we don't even need a pasuk to tell you that an adam can continue eating even after the harvest. When you go into the vineyard of your friend, and when you're going to work for in a vineyard, normally part of that is to carry. And the Torah says, you bring someone into work and you carry him to carry the grapes out that he could eat. So that's where we would know. Now the Gemara goes the other direction. What do you know a shar when it's attached, meaning before it reaches threshing? How do you know that the shar that's working is a din of lisachsan as he's working in the fields? So Gemara kal v'chayim miyadim. It's a kal v'chayim from ma'adam. I wonder how this works, because I always saw pictures of animals working in the fields. They have like a feed bag attached to the animals, a good snack as it's working. It doesn't get distracted from hunger. But it sounds like it would be a problem of leisachsim to do that. Even though I don't know, maybe if you're feeding it, it's not leisachsim. But you're stopping it from eating the food in the fields. I wonder how Jewish farmers do it. You're familiar with what I'm talking about, right? They go with the
I know,
feedback.
but I would think, like you said, if they have food, then it's not an issue. The whole issue
is that you're stopping them from eating altogether. Maybe
yeah.
to ask a real farmer.
You're allowed to be smarter than the animal.
We hope. Not always the case, but
I'm saying, be allowed to be.
Yeah. Some people think you're not allowed to. Amakra. Oh, so did I skip? Oh no, I didn't. I skipped. So Gemara says, okay, I lost. Okay, you can't learn out from an Adam that he could eat b'mechober. You don't have a din.
Why are we saying ma'adam sheina echel b'talish? We just went ahead and said
so again, it's like I mentioned before. It's the same thing that it means just that it's not lahedya. Rashi says that.
Right.
So we're towards the bottom of Peiches Amid Beis. Let a shar be mitzvah. Let's say there's a din. It's such a strange thing, but there's a v'chaya chicha imach that you have to provide. It's a intense type of tzar b'alei. Not only are you supposed to avoid them having pain, you have to keep them alive. I don't know how that would work. Like the Torah says you're allowed to eat animals. How could you have a chiyuv lahachiyos? Let's say Yeshar mitzvah lahachiyos mikal v'chayim u'ma'adam sheyat mitzvah al-chizmasa mitzvah lahachiyos. You have a chiyuv to provide for it. Shar shat mitzvah al-chizmasa and din shat mitzvah lahachiyos. Maybe it just means until you eat it, you have to provide it enough to eat. You can't just say, "I'll let it starve." Amar kra v'chaya chichima v'lo shar. Torah says v'chaya chicha, only a chicha but not a shar. How do we know that the din of a shar, that it's allowed to eat, that you can't be sachsam a shar, is not just when it's by the threshing, but even earlier by the harvest? Amakra reyacha beis pa'amim. It says in the parsha of that you have to feed a pile, you have to allow a pile to eat. It says reyacha 2 times. And the shar mechover, we use the extra pasuk to tell you that this din of the din of a pile eating, which is by mechover, is also going to apply to a shar. Ravina short circuits this whole discussion, right? This whole discussion was we have a pasuk that says, "L'sachshum shar b'disha." You can't stop a shar from eating when it's threshing. That's talking about after the food has already been harvested. And it says by a pile that he can eat by Gemar Malacha, which means at the time of harvesting, but not necessarily when later, when we come to the time of threshing. So how do you know each one? How do you know the part that's not directly related? How do we know that an Adam, even b'mechover by threshing, and how do we know a shar even earlier by harvesting? So we brought different rise. Avina says it's not, the whole thing is not a question. Avina Amaloy Adam Matalish, we're on the last line of Feiches Amabez. Avina Amaloy Adam Matalish V'leishavachor V'tzrichi Kro. Neither of them need a pasuk. Dichsiv V'sachsam Shar B'disha. You can't Matal and ox as it's threshing. Michti Kol Mili Isnu V'chasina. Now, all animals are included in the din of chasima, the yafin and shar mishabas, because we learn Gzeir Shabbos shar mishabas. It says shar by Shabbos, and the halachas of Shabbos. You're not allowed to do work with your animal. It says over there a bunch of different animals, and we learn it includes all animals. And we learn from there that anytime the Torah says anything about any animal, it refers to all animals. We're not being mechalik between one animal and the next. What do we have to say? Shar l'sachsum shar bedisha. Let's say l'sachsum bedisha. I just want to make clear, even though it says yafin and shar mishabas, it doesn't mean we learn Gzeir Shabbos from Shabbos specifically to chasima. Like I said, I think this is the way I remember it from Shabbos. We see it different places that whenever I think we had it by Dalad Vehei, that whenever the Torah says, like if your shar falls into a bar, or if your animal gets stolen, all these things, whenever the Torah refers to animals, it refers to all animals, all behemoths. So therefore, what do you have to say? L'sachshem shar. This is a Torah, obviously, when it's talking about muzzling, it's talking about animals. Let's skip the shar part. So the reason why it says shar is to make a hekesh between the animal that's being nechsam, that's being muzzled, and the man, the owner who's putting on the muzzle. The nechsam l'chaisam, and the other way around, and the adam to the shar. Ma chaisam oichel v'mechober, just like we said, a adam who's a pile is allowed to eat the mechober, because the Torah, like we said, we learned a couple of block back that it's referring to when he's harvesting. So too, then leisachsam is b'mechober. Ma nechsam oichel b'talish, and just like the din of leisachsam shabadisha is talking about by threshing after the grain is separated. Achaisim oichel b'talish. So too, the animal can even eat. So too, the pile can eat even after he finishes harvest. Tan Rabban, Daish. We say L'sachim Shor B'dishay. What as he's threshing? Ma Daish Miyuchad Dava Shigdule Karka. Upayel Boy. Just like Daish, just like the grain, is something that's grown from the ground, and a pile can eat it, like we just learned. Afkal Shigdule Karka Payel Boy. It's coming to include Yotza HaChoylev VaMachavetz VaMagavin. It has to be something that's gedulei karka, but not someone who's milking or who's churning butter or is making cheese. She'en gedulei karka. Milk doesn't come from the ground; it comes from an animal. So there's no din that that it's considered that it's gedulei karka. That you're going to be a din of a pile is going to be allowed to eat from it, right? A factory worker can't take from what he's working on. This din that a pile can eat from what he's working on is specifically not just general agricultural produce, but specifically produce that grows on the ground. So, affecting moral lovely, what do I need that for? It says when you go into the vineyard of your friend, when we talk about this din of a pile. So that's specifically something that's gedulei karka. So why would I think that it could extend even to when you're milking? It's true. Talk about the chamino hayl v'ksiv kama. The rab is kol bali kama. Since it's coming to say kama, which tells you anything that grows, the rab is not maybe the lav gedulei karka. Sometimes when it says kama, it says what's standing, it means it's a more expansive version of gedule karka. And it comes even to include animals, what's the produce of animals. It's a more general agricultural term. So I might think that also the produce of an animal, like a milking or cheese, would also be included, that a pilot who's doing that would be entitled to eat kamashmala. Tan idach, another drasha that we learn from Disha. Dayish, ma dayish miyuchad davish b'shas k'ma malacha payil oichel boy. Av kol shu b'shas k'ma malacha payil oichel boy. Just like dayish, it's talking about something that a pile could eat, as by the harvest. Yotza hamanachas b'shumin ubitzolim. Maybe it's coming to exclude someone who's weeding in garlic and onions. Since it's not the gemar malach, it hasn't yet reached the stage of harvesting. What you're doing is you're weeding earlier, and you're taking out the onions and the garlic that are no good, that are not edible. So I might say, so it's coming to say at that point, the pile, it's not yet reached the stage of harvesting that a pile is allowed to eat. Right? We say that by a pile it starts from harvesting. By a shar, we said it could even, we see it goes even after later on. But prior to harvesting, when you have someone plowing, when you have someone working before it's ready for harvest, he can't eat. Zak Gemara. Zak Gemara, correct Gemara, lovely. Meval Kali Chalitita Nafka. We already have Meval Kali Chalitita, and it's only something that's capable of being put into a kli and saved. That's part of the pasuk of a pile. So we're like Shichem. Afagav the kamash of Tatini Mibeni Alimi. We're talking about not here, not onions and garlic that are inedible, but it's onion and garlics that are smaller, so they really are edible. So you theoretically could put them into your kli. So that's what the pasuk is coming to tell you, that it's shas gemar malacha. It has to be the real shas gemar malacha, not just some of the few that are capable of being eaten. Tanyidach, another drasha of Disha. Dayish, ma dayish miyuchadav shalai nigmer malachtai lemaiser paylechaboy. Just like dayish, at the time of threshing, it's not gemar malacha yet. It still has to be put into piles and needs meruach. That's, I would say, a pile echel, meaning the an animal could eat it and a pile could eat it, like we learned before. Someone who is separating, they used to make cakes of dates and figs, dried figs, and put them together. Someone's who's splitting them apart. Since it's already reached, like we said in the Mishnah, this is really like we saw before. This is really midrabanan, that we say that the chiyuv of when a pile is allowed to eat goes together with the din of when it becomes mechliyev and meiser. Not that, as we're going to see in the Gemara, not because the two are directly linked. It's not caused by the fact that it becomes mechliyev and meiser, but that's the simon of when it becomes that a pile can eat it. Once you reach that point, the pile can no longer eat it. So that's we're coming to exclude someone who's separating tamarim and groigos. That already is the end of the malacha for it. It's not going to be any miruach. It's not going to be put into a pile. So therefore, the pile can't eat it. In fact, the Bava Tanya haboidel b'tamarim groigos pile eichaboy. A pile can't eat it. Rapapa kitanya hi tuchlani. That's not talking about the cakes that where they used to take the ripe dates and figs and press them into a cake, and then they need to be split apart in order to be sold or eaten. Well, there, when it said that the pile could eat it, it's talking about unripe ones that were put it together, they were squished together to allow them to ripen. So they're still not yet mechuyev and meiser, and therefore the pile can still eat it. Tani idach. Daesh, another drush of Daesh, Ma Daesh miyuchad davar shel inigma v'lachta l'chala u'payel oichel boy, af kol davar shel inigma v'lachta l'chaya payel oichel boy. Yotza, a loshva, katif, someone who's kneading and who's shaping, oifa and baking, shenigma v'lachta l'chala, ain't payel oichel boy. Once it reaches the stage that it's nigma v'lachta l'chala, then the payel can no longer eat it. But we said that even before it reaches the point of kneading and baking, once it was nigma l'lachta l'maiser, it's no longer, the pile is no longer able to eat it. So well, like kasha, the chutzlaritz askina. We're talking chutzlaritz, the leka maiser. There's no chiyuv maiser, so that's why it goes till later. It goes till the chiyuv maiser. So if you're in chutzlaritz, there's no chiyuv chala either. So then it should go forever. El oilam ba'aretz. We're talking about an Eretz Yisrael. Like kasha. B'shavash kivshu b'shavash kolku. We're talking about in the 14 years after Yeshua went into Eretz Yisrael. So first they were 7 years of conquering and 7 years of dividing up the lands. There is a chi of chala. The chi of meiser was not mechuyev until the Yidden had divided up the land. The chi of chala applied immediately as soon as they came into Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara asked the question that really we've mentioned a couple of times. Midi meiser kagar? It's not that meiser. It doesn't depend on whether there actually is meiser. Gemara malacha kagar, like we said, it's just a siman. It's not the fact of whether meiser applies. That's the demarcation, the line of demarcation of when a pile is chayiv, but not because of the fact that it's meiser. It's because you reach the end of the malacha. Elam Ravino, kruf v'tani. Daish, ma daish. So you have to say that this drush was a little different. Ma daish mishra davar shalei nikmo lachta l'maiser ulachala, just like daish is something which its malacha is not finished. Both legabi that it's mechayiv v'maiser, and that you have to separate chala u'payil oichaboy af kol shalei nikmo lachta l'maiser l'chaya payil oichaboy. So we say that that einachanami, the din of a pile eating, will be dependent on both things. It's not just Gemara Malacha legabe ma'aser. It also is going to need from chala.
So we're changing.
Yeah. So
Midrash is the only time you chayev. The only time the Gemara Malachta is when you reach the stage of having to take chala.
If you hire a pile, and you're like in a bakery, he's still allowed to eat the croissants and the donuts.
So let's say if it's someone's milking the cow, they can also have it any time.
No, because
in the process.
that's not gedulei karka. We concluded it has to be produce from the ground, not something that comes from an animal. But even though it's a bakery, it originally came from the ground. It's still flour. I mean, maybe if you're putting in eggs and things, maybe the pile can't eat the other things that you put in. But if you're baking matzah, for example, you have a matzah bakery and it's just flour from the ground, the pile is allowed to eat it.
But you have water.
Yeah, so we're going to see, by the way, soon that not only is he not allowed to eat things that are added in that don't belong to him, he's not allowed to eat them because it makes it more tasty. So I think frosting or eggs and something would also be a problem. Okay, I think we're going to stop here. I see you're in shul, so you're going to start davening.
Well,
have a good day, and Bez Hashem, we'll see you tomorrow in shul. I'll be in shul tomorrow at 6:15. Take care.